Okay. Before I open it up to the audience, can I quickly ask you guys a question? Is happiness, safety, trust, are all those things absolutely necessary? Does every kind of human thrive on those three things? Can it be a problem of having too much of it, keeping you from innovating? Too much security? If your employee feels too much security, safety, happiness, would they ever want to do anything more beyond their everyday job description? So how much of it is a good thing?
I'll jump in. I think there's an incredible balance there. I don't think we learn unless we have some challenge. I mean, our brains work that way. We have to have some challenge, but we have to have enough safety. So it's that constant balancing of those two. And if we get one out of whack, then we don't get much.
Yeah, definitely with security must come curiosity if we want to be able to grow, I guess. I had an interesting discussion this morning with Tim before we started about the fact that actually you learn a lot more with the people that are as different as possible from you.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, on the trust piece, I think you can survive without it. It just makes it a hell of a lot easier if you have it, would be my point on that.
And actually, it also refers to the digital world that you've been talking about, because with AI comes the recommendations of the content that you've already seen, what's going to interest you, because the purpose of YouTube, for example, is to make sure that you're going to keep clicking on the things that interest you. And so that you end up into this filter bubbles of content that only interest you and that prevents you from being curious and from growing.
You know, both of you said something that kind of interests me, is talk about, you know, you can survive if you don't have trust, but can you thrive and can you be sustainable? That would be, to me, the thing that's important.
Yeah. Again, trust could potentially mean I trust in my workplace, I trust the others not to work in my best interest. Trust could mean something different from a positive spin on that word. So, would someone else like to ask something?
Hello. Yeah, thank you. My name is Sky. I'm a student. Just a few days ago, about 5 days ago, the EU have rolled out this revised payment service directive that allows fintech companies to use bank APIs to give better customer service. Now, what a lot of people are not paying attention to is that fintech companies use a certain technique called screen scraping to aggregate bank details. Now, with that, it mimics the website of a bank so that they can get the data, and customers have no idea that they are putting in or keying in their login credentials to a mimicked website. And that poses a lot of security issues and data privacy issues. Now, from the part of the customer who doesn't know anything about it, how do I know that I can trust anything, or it's not even existent in my in my life? So how do we create or foster that kind of conversation around trust?
Yeah, I think it's education, and as I put up that Amazon example, I mean that sort of thing, and everybody's in e-commerce has been doing that sort of thing for a long time. I think it's only coming to light now that people are actually having the discussion about the pros and cons of that. And I think, banking is going to be the same. I mean, clearly with banking and the bigger issue that involves your money, and if all of a sudden there's fraud, then it will come out in a very big way. So it's but again, my whole point about data comes back to how do we use it for good rather than for something else.
Hi, my name's Pam. Thank you all very much. It's been very informative and very insightful. I noticed on one of the slides, Andrew, that you put a sort of statistic up there around healthcare industry being one of the most trusted industries. I had some, I guess, sort of experiences in as I guess, a customer, or if you were in that sort of space, and I find that it's very much still in the manual element. I guess with the introduction of technology and sort of digitization and I guess all those changes in that sector, do you see that potentially sort of that trust starting to fall away, or do you see that as enhancing that
Again,
sector?
I think the healthcare industry's got a big opportunity to use tech in a big way, and I know Bupa have got an innovation lab, for example, out of the UK that they're really working hard to work with health tech type companies. I think there's a huge opportunity in aged care. I've got a friend in Melbourne who's got a startup in bed technology where it can actually tell people's pulse rates and everything while they're sleeping. Because at the moment, to your point, the elderly people in those aged care homes, they have to come in every hour to check them, and these sort of things are enabling slightly less cost, but actually an always on. I suppose monitoring of those people. So I think there's huge opportunities. There's Sam Prince, who founded Zambrero, for those from interstate, the Mexican chain. I mean, he's also founded one of the fastest growing medical practices called Next Practice, that's focused on how he uses technology to create an incredible customer experience. He's a doctor by trade, and he's just felt like that's a clear niche in the market, that whole manual side of medical care is not great. So I think there's opportunity. Again, I think if we think about the two lots of data we don't want compromised is our banking data and our medical data. So that's going to be, again, that balance.
There's so much around communication with it. You think about when we had the Medicare, and our data all going into, and that should have been something that would be helpful, but it was a complete debacle because of the way it was communicated.
Rob Hackett, and anaesthetist from Sydney. I work in healthcare on the front line. I'd just like to say, don't trust it, basically. It's really bad, and that's why I'm here. The World Health Organization put out a statistic 2 days ago, the first World Patient Safety Day. 5 patients will die every minute from medical error across the world. And the problem is it's only increasing. I'll be talking later, but and I don't bring this up, but if you could imagine training doctors, nurses to be the best that they could possibly be at passing an exam, and then every day you make the exam a little bit harder, you'd expect the failure rate to carry on increasing. The conditions that we've got at the moment is more and more complexity brought into the front line. It's more likely that we will fail than ever before. I was speaking to a mother of a medical student this morning who's here, and he's about to go onto the front line next year. So I was at a conference last week. The suicidal ideation rate is least in medical students compared to all other students, and then it just spikes up as soon as they become junior doctors. We're putting them into these extremely complex environments. There's a lot of amazing work that you guys can do in this space, but you need to get right down to that customer interface for it to work properly. If we're only interacting, and this is how a lot of businesses interact, they find who the influencers are and drop this stuff onto the front line. If you don't get to that very front line, that interaction between the frontline staff member and the patient, that's where it's at. We need to get there to bring in the great innovations that we'd like to see.
So I'll just jump in. I was just curious, you gave some great examples, Andrew, and across the group around trust and when we lose it. What are the factors that you see people regaining that trust effectively? You mentioned Steve Smith doing really well with cricket, and sport's a really topical area. We had it with politicians. But we rebuild that trust, but at what point can they be seen in a new light altogether? And when you use organisations, how do they rebuild to something new in an area where disruption is actually targeting trust specifically?
I had a little comment in there, and you'll no doubt have a point, Connie, but I had a little, in one of my sentences I talked about, trust is gained in drops and lost in buckets, and I think that's the truth of how you need to regain trust. You need to put your head down, do the right thing, and actually stop talking about it and actually walk the talk and get it done. I mean, there are all sorts of frameworks around rebuilding trust, but for me, the fundamental simplistic way of doing it is just to do, I think Melbourne Storm, when they went through their issues with the salary cap breaches, were terrific. They just did things like, rather than going and chasing a new sponsor because their sponsor left because of it, they just put a different charity on their jersey every week for a year. And little things like that just start rebuilding trust in a meaningful way. It's not done in a, try hard type way. It's just, they all started adding up. They were lucky enough to have great leaders on and off the field at the time. So a number of those things just laddered up, and now most people respect them. And I've seen a lot of I've seen recent brand surveys within the sporting community. They're the number one respected brand in sport for 10 years from probably being the least. So yeah, but it's the little things.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think like even the example that you gave, it's rebuilding trust. It's not going out with a marketing campaign right away. Yeah. It's all the things that cause that trust to erode in the first place, and it's often internal things within the organization and the way that people work with each other. That's got to be built before we can go out and advertise about it.
Hi, my name's Jane, and I guess one of the things I'm thinking about trust, and especially in my own personal experiences with the internet and banks, etc., is that we also have a responsibility to take responsibility for our use of the internet. And I think that's actually built up more trust because I know now how different banks operate. I know how different passwords work, etc. And so I think trust is also a two-way street, and we need to take responsibility too.
Okay, Daniel Schlagwein, if I can ask a question for all of you, and you have been thinking about these issues, one very broad question, and there's a lot of my MBA students in the room, and we have been discussing that in the course, is the question, if you're looking at the changes, and you had the pro and cons of the digital disruption on your slide, and you talked about, linear model of economic activity versus a circular, sustainable. The question is, we are living in a market economy, in a capitalist society. We're living in an area where digital technology is developing at a rapid pace. Are these changes from within? Is this rearranging chairs on the Titanic, or are we really able to turn around these battleships like the marketing discipline, which is effectively encouraging consumerism in a certain sense? And large brands that sort of, on the one hand, we want to do good, but, is it more like putting a couple of green leaves around our corporate logo? So how much can we change the system from within, and how much do we have inherent problems in the way that we approach the whole way of consuming, producing, and developing at speed?
Great question. I'll take a first stab. So I think it's a situation that has to be addressed on multiple scales. And companies or organizations are one element of the answer. Change from within has to happen, but not only. There are two other scales, at least, that have to be moving as well. The individual scale, the change coming from the citizen, and the government scale, the country scale, the change coming from the regulation, so that they all move in the same direction. From a climate change perspective, for example, it is not too late. Okay, it's not the Titanic yet. It will be the Titanic if we don't change the things now. Going on the path of 1.5 degrees is probably not possible anymore. 2 degrees, we still have a chance to do that. So let's rearrange the chairs so that we don't end up on the Titanic.
Look, I think there's generational change too with the people and the citizens. So I saw there's a great piece of research that Junkie Media do every year. It's part of O Media now. And it looks at Gen Z and millennials, and it's been tracking changes for 7 years around what they're looking for. Gen Z is quite different to the millennials. is what's coming out of that. But certainly the whole for-purpose piece is a lot stronger with that younger age group. So I think they're going to have a big say as time goes on. So I'm the same. I mean, I think things can change. I think the companies that are starting to do well have got that long-term outlook, not this short-term outlook, and they're starting to see the benefits now of doing that, whether it be looking after their employees better or their communities better. You know, some of those brands are doing very, very well. So.
Yeah, I agree with what both of you said. And I also think, I mean, we talk about the younger generation driving some of that, but it was interesting in the research that I did, I had more older people rather than younger people who were saying, you know, what is success? What does it mean? And it was about, you know, personal growth, and it was about, you know, not about making money, not about, you know, the traditional kinds of markers of success. So I found that interesting. I think when everything gets shaken up for them, they rethink these things.
It was interesting. One of the things that came out of that junkie research that jumped out at me was that youngest generation don't think they're going to be able to afford things like houses and cars and other things. And so, you know, materialism for them is going to be, you know, micro job title promotions. You know, to go from a junior manager to a, you know, junior middle manager. You know, that's going to be more meaningful to them as materialism. But interestingly, fashion and consumer, and on that side from a consumerism point of view, is important to them, because again, it's another way at a cheaper price to show that they're doing well. So I think there's
It's still being valued, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, we still want to make a contribution and be valued and be recognized for it, be it big or small. Yeah.
So I want to ask you about that assertion you made earlier about the oxytocin. And here's my thing. As you most know, I do digital humans, so we're trying to create artificial people which will elicit the oxytocin response, which means that we'll be able to get people to trust our digital assistants more, and they will be incredibly bad at it, because the very stuff that you're discussing means we're very bad at picking what's going on with strangers, which is why I think it's Malcolm Gladwell's got a new book out called Talking to Strangers. And he points out that even experts in the FBI and the CIA and interrogators are hopeless with strangers on truth, which is why spies go undetected for 40 years, why, you know, this is like hopeless. So everything you're talking about in trust actually allows us to be duped more, be ripped off more, have Ponzi schemes and everything else. And of course, I'm trying to do that with computers. So you might like to comment on that.
Yeah, look, it's true. I think trust can be pushed both ways, and you just hope that the the masses go the right way rather than the wrong way with trust. But and look, and the oxytocin, it was a great article I read on that. HBR did it about a year ago, talking about how that was going to play out. But I mean, I've seen all of your cool stuff on the digital humans, and if that can help have I mean, at the end of the day, as a marketer, I just want consumers to have a great experience with that brand. I mean, that's what we're trying to do. And at the moment, they're not through the technology, most of the technology we're using. That's becoming more mainstream. When that becomes more mainstream, maybe it'll be a better experience.
But if I met a person, a stranger, I'm more likely to be gypped by them than by tech.
Yes. But if you're walking into a McDonald's store, then they're not, you know what I mean? Like that's my frame. I agree on the stranger piece, but if you're walking into what's meant to be a trusted environment and there's a person behind there, there's a higher likelihood that they're trustworthy.
So it's people in institutions rather than just people.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. Because we're stopping having, you know, hardly anyone walks into a bank anymore to have that, and I often say, what's the best customer experience you have? It's every morning going and getting your coffee from your favourite coffee shop. Who knows what coffee you have, how you like it, and they've already half made it before you turn out. You know, and your local butcher's the same, the baker's often the same. They're the best people, and it's something that people want to have. And they're starting to miss out in the bigger institutions.
Hi, my name's Brad Monahan from Revenue Builder. I had a question about purpose and generational shifts and climate change and so on that you were talking about a minute ago. At the moment, it seems we live in a country where people just continually vote for climate change denialists and people who are not really even close to being progressive on environmental issues, let alone social ones. It's great that millennials and Gen Z are going to affect a shift when they come into power, but we're talking many years, if not decades, with Gen Z before they start to really impact society. So what do we do for the next 10 or 20 years while we still have these fairly sort of unresponsive people in positions of power when temperatures are going to rise pretty quickly, seems like we've got a pretty long wait before we can really make any genuine lasting impact.
Yeah. Concerning, right? It's funny that we live in a country where there is probably one of the highest solar resources in the world, and we are still digging coal out. That's how Australia has built his wealth, and so yeah, different levels through which we can attack the problem. In that particular context, in other contexts that would be different. I think in Europe, for example, it's a bit different. In that particular context, I would count on the companies, on the corporate organizations.
But they're led by the people who love voting in the Conservative government repeatedly, right? So there's clearly that value shift is actually not happening at senior leadership in corporate environments. Otherwise, those individuals wouldn't keep supporting the coalition.
So yes and no. For me, one of the interesting examples here is corporate America. Corporate America has been a huge resistance to this kind of planet people aspects, the purpose aspect. And I think it was last month, there was a group of CEOs from the biggest corporations in America, including financial institutions, which are probably among the most resistant to that, that went out and communicated on the fact that they cannot be driven by profit only anymore. So it's hard, it's not here, but I think that there are clues that there is a change. And, well, I want to dedicate my time to make that change happen, and I hope I'm not the only one.
And I think if I think about my marketing colleagues, and you spoke about consumerism before, there's also the power of marketing to persuade people to do other things. And Rory Sutherland wrote a great piece the other day in the UK and talked about, the accountants will find people, the lawyers will mandate, and the marketers can persuade. And I'm hoping that, if we can use marketing for good with a lot of this sort of stuff through that corporate power. And we're seeing it in other issues, the gay marriage issue within Australia. The corporates got behind that a lot more than a lot of the politicians, and change was driven. So.
Can we thank Connie?